Hi, Drift here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Got another presentation today, or another video we're doing. I'm going to close out chapter 3 of how ownership of this Mitsubishi Delica van in turn resulted in, or ultimately led to, the ownership of an Audi R8. And I'm not saying that you have to buy a Mitsubishi Delica van to end up getting an Audi R8, or that owning a Mitsubishi Delica van is going to result in owning an Audi R8. I'm just saying that there was linkages between my ownership of this and things that transpired, which resulted in me then purchasing chapter 2, the Audi S6, which then ultimately some other events took place which led to me owning the Audi R8. And I don't think if I hadn't had these other vehicles, I would have ended up with that in this situation, because there were things that transpired that led me to the point where I could pull the trigger and buy an Audi R8. Let's have a bit of a look at the vehicles just close up before we get on to that story. Just let's flick over to the other side. So here's the van. It's not very clean at the moment. It gets used all the time. It's a workhorse. I've done some branding just recently. You would have seen you might have seen my video, which shows how to place small vinyl stickers. So we've got the YouTube and the Instagram on there. And also we've done the same thing on the S6 on the rear quarter window, and the Audi R8 also now has the branding on the rear quarter window there. So there are the three vehicles in question. The Audi R8, we'll go for a walk around. There we are. It is the original 2007 V8. This was one of three brought in at the end of 2007 in New Zealand. In New Zealand, we got them earlier than you people in the States. For anyone that's watching in the United States of America, I believe the first year that you had these cars was 2008. But Europe and New Zealand, a good European British Commonwealth country, we got them first. So that was one of the first Audi R8s in New Zealand brought in new. It is a New Zealand new car. It hasn't been imported from Singapore or Japan or any other. Let's move on to that story. Just recap chapter 1. Had the Mitsubishi Delica van for 15 years. Having spent a lot of that time I was overseas, it was my holiday van when I came back to visit family and run around and go camping and fishing and things. So when I returned to New Zealand after being overseas, my wife and I travelled around in it. Eventually we got jobs and we moved, and the van got a little bit tired. It wasn't running very well, and I didn't have time at that point, nor a place to work on it. We were living in an apartment at the time, so I bought the Audi S6. So I wanted a nicer car anyway. I've always enjoyed having a V8. I'm a bit of a hoon at heart, so I was looking around at more modern V8s than the traditional V8s that we used to drive in New Zealand, being the old Holdens. If you're from New Zealand, you understand that, or Holdens or Commodores or Ford Falcons. In America you didn't have either of those cars, but you've got the Monaro as a Chrysler something or other, I believe, or something, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, they're GMs and Fords, V8s. And they've discontinued both of those cars from production now. They've finished in the late 20-teens, I think 18 was the last year of production for both of those cars in their rear-wheel drive V8 powered format. So in any case, I saw the European cars as better value for money, higher performance, better engineered, more options, better equipped. And well, as it turns out, I think more reliable as well, probably. Some might argue with that. If you get a bad European car, you could be up for trouble. Back in the day, back in the old days, 20 years ago in New Zealand, European cars were quite new to the country. There wasn't the established network for parts and maintenance. So they got a reputation as being expensive to maintain, but that was 20 or 30 years ago. Nowadays, there's dealers all over the country for Mercedes and Peugeot and Audi and all of the European brands, you know. There's established networks of parts and maintenance, and you can get parts from overseas via the internet. If you rent yourself, like I do, you can get cheap parts, copy parts. You can get cheap OEM parts, and you know, they're not that hard to work on. The workshop manuals are readily available. There's tutorials, there's YouTube, and they're really, it's not hard to maintain those European cars. So anyway, I got an Audi S6, and having that actually proved to me that it wasn't expensive to have a European car. I've done nothing more than the regular maintenance, brakes, pads, rotors, oil and water. Well, not water, antifreeze, but I mean, even that, it hasn't used more than a cup in the 5 years I've had it of coolant. The gearbox is sealed for life on that car. Audi believe that it never needs any maintenance. Again, some might argue with that. I know of vehicles I've seen where they've had replacement gearboxes after 60, 70, 80,000, 100,000 k's. That one has the original gearbox, it's still sealed, it's done 205,000 k's. So there you go, you luck of the draw. You get a car that's built on a Wednesday when everyone was having a great time and there were a long weekend coming up with a Friday off or something like that, and you get a car like that. If you get a car that's built on a Monday when everyone's just got back from a long weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off or something, and they're all hungover, you might get a car that the gearbox goes after a shorter period of time. I don't know how it works. Maybe it's just the fact that some cars are jinxed, some cars aren't. But if you get a good one, there you go. As Audi say, state, sealed. There's no top up, there's no checking the fluids in the transmission. It just goes forever. And the motor on this one too. I've had it, I have no record of the service records before I got it. It didn't come. Oh, it does actually. It has got the manual in there. And I think from new, it was maintained up to about 100,000 k's, and then the records aren't maintained in there. I got it at 150. There was a service sticker on the window. There were some receipts in the glove box. I gathered the oil was changed. I've got nothing to say that the timing belts were ever changed. It's a belt-driven motor, that one. It's not chained. I've done nothing to it. It's got no problems whatsoever. It doesn't use any oil. It has a small little rocker cover leak on one side, which comes and goes. I do need to do the rocker cover gasket to get rid of that. That came into play about 2 years ago. So yeah, Audis are renowned. The 4.2 litre V8 motors are renowned for their rocker cover leaks. But however, 205,000 k's, absolutely no engine out work, no service work, air conditioning still blows cold, everything works, everything absolutely works in that car. It's a great car. I don't regret for a minute buying it. In fact, I think it's right up there in the top 3 vehicles. It is definitely up there in the top 3 vehicles that I've ever owned. Top 3 or 4. I think it sits in the top 3. Anyway, so I bought the Audi R8. A bit on the back of having learnt that having an Audi wasn't too bad maintenance wise. I never really expected to get an Audi R8. I never expected to have a supercar, but my wife and I were saving to buy a house in New Zealand, having been back here in the country for a while, and we started looking in 2019. We put offers in on houses. However, due to one reason or another, not being outbid slightly, having other people with slightly better conditions on their offers, we didn't actually secure a place. And then COVID hit the country in New Zealand. It hit in pretty hard and quickly. I mean, I know overseas people had known about it since late 2019, but New Zealand really hadn't heard of it until February 2020, and by late March, we went into full-blown level 4 lockdown, and that was it. Everything shut, all businesses closed, only essential services. Everyone was working from home if they could, or not working at all, and locked indoors. When we did that, I actually had a donor vehicle for the van by that stage. I picked up a two-wheel drive version of that had the 4G64 motor running well. That one was coughing and spluttering, all the cylinders were not firing properly, and that gave me a project to work on during lockdown, because we ended up being in lockdown for over 6 weeks. So that gave me a project to work on and keep me busy during that time. So yeah, we went into lockdown and I did a motor change on that van in my spare time. I worked remotely from home, and then when I wasn't working, I went out to the garage and took the motor out of the donor van, put the new motor in that van. Also during that time, my wife caught me looking at photos of this R8, which was for sale and had been for sale on and off for I think about a year. It was for sale privately. I saw the price come down to a realistic number, and at the time I'd have to say it was, and I know it sounds cliche because everyone on YouTube's saying it nowadays, it was the cheapest R8 in New Zealand. It disappeared off the market. I gathered that the seller couldn't get a private sale. It was on the market, as cars like this are, unless you get a buyer that actually wants an Audi R8 that comes along when you're trying to sell it. It gets to a point where if you really must or really need to get rid of it to get to do something, you've got to leave to go overseas or whatever the reason is, you end up going to a dealer, and perhaps he offloaded it to the dealer. I would say the dealer would have got another several $1,000s off the price he was asking, or perhaps the dealer picked it up for the price they were asking privately. I don't know, but in any case, it reappeared at a dealership for several $1,000s more. I think initially it was up in the $90,000 bracket. It came down by $10,000, and then when COVID came in, the dealerships were closed for quite some time. My wife caught me looking at photos of that, and again on the internet for sale, and she said, "You keep looking at that car." I said, I want one day. That's my dream car. She says, "Well, you know, you never know what's going to happen with COVID, and well, this COVID's teaching us that you just don't know what's happening in life, and have a go, buy it." I said, but we've got this deposit saved up for our house. And she said, "Oh, don't use all the deposit, because what I could do is put some money down on it and buy it with credit." Because what I did do with the black car was I bought that entirely on credit, purely to increase our credit rating. Because we had the money, could have bought the car outright, but I put no deposit on that and paid it off in 2 years to establish a good credit history. So I was amazed. I thought, it's a good idea, but there was the support from my wife that amazed me. I haven't had a partner that I would even thought of if I'd said, "Oh, I'd like to buy a car." "Oh, we're saving for a house." You can't go consider buying a bloody sports car or a supercar when we haven't got a house. But no, my wife was completely. She just said, "Yeah, go out and do it. Yeah, we only live once. Get out there and do it." So anyway, I contacted initially the car dealership. I contacted my financial broker and set the wheels in motion for taxi looking for a fare, but it's not me, obviously. Bloody taxis. All right, where were we? Right, that's where we were. Set the wheels in motion to have a crack at purchasing an Audi R8. In the meantime, what I also did was I looked at YouTube videos that were out, and they said that the Audi R8 is an everyday supercar. It's made up of all the bits that are in the RS4 and lots of other Audi bits. It's not really expensive. Parts aren't expensive. Yes, it's got supercar traits. If the air conditioner fails, it has to have an engine out to change the aircon, although there's some cheats out there cheat codes or cheat methods that allow you to supposedly do that without doing that. But there's little idiosyncrasies and what have you, which you would expect by having a supercar. But the more I watched YouTube videos and the experiences of others on YouTube, like the Canadian rider, his experience and his 1 year ownership, costs and things like that, it became evident that having an Audi R8 wasn't going to be the expensive proposition that one might think. It's not like maybe what you've heard the horror stories of having a Ferrari and having to spend $15,000 every 3 years to have an engine out service, or if something breaks, you can put down $5,000, but even think about finding the problem and You know, the same for other Italian sports cars. And so, yep, via the financial broker, we made a ridiculously low ball offer to the dealer, who initially wasn't keen, came back and accepted the offer, to which I went back and said, well, for that I would want the car also shipped to my home address, or close by, or to your dealership nearby, which they did. They shipped it from Auckland to Wellington to their dealership in Wellington. Initially he didn't want to do that. There was an extra $1,000 he wanted me to pay on the price, but after some time to think about it, he called me back and accepted the offer. So I bought the cheapest Audi R8 in the country in April 2020. I couldn't get it because they weren't able to ship it until after the country came out of full level 4 lockdown and went to level 3, which meant that they could then ship things between different provinces, between different regions of New Zealand. And so hence sometime in May, eventually my car was waiting for me at the dealership in Wellington, and I went and picked it up. So that is the story of how I came to have an Audi R8. What started off as with the ownership of a Mitsubishi Delica van, which progressed to the ownership of a Audi S6, and resulted in the ownership of a supercar, an Audi R8, and a beauty she is too. That's chapter 3. I'll have more stuff coming up, but hit subscribe. Thank you for watching.